Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. It's been an amazing 24 hours, even by the action-packed standards of 2018. There's been a lot of drama in Washington. Last night, as you doubtless know, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani revealed on Sean Hannity's show that President Trump did, in fact, reimburse his lawyer Michael Cohen for payments Cohen made to porn star Stormy Daniels. That seemed like a major story at the time, but within hours, it wasn't even the biggest story of the day. NBC News reported that federal law enforcement had wiretapped Michael Cohen's phone and apparently recorded at least one conversation he'd had with the White House, presumably with the President of the United States. But then that story changed. NBC's new account claims that the FBI simply recorded the numbers that Cohen dialed and not the content of the calls he made. And that's where we are as of right now, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. One thing we know for sure is that NBC screwed up, and there's no surprise there, obviously. But that's pretty much all we can be certain of. If NBC's first story was wrong, why do we assume the second is right? We really don't know what the truth is, and we have no way of knowing. In the absence of honesty from our government, we're totally dependent upon leaks for our news, and many of those are dishonest. Michael Cohen, by the way, still doesn't know why his office was raided, and his phones and email were apparently monitored by the government because nobody in government will tell him, and they're not required to tell him. How Orwellian is that, by the way? Imagine if it happened to you. If one day armed men arrived at your office or your home and seized your phone, your computers, and your files at gunpoint, but never explained why they were doing it. And the next thing you knew, cable news anchors were calling you a criminal. Now, Michael Cohen certainly looks like a shady character, but so what? Shadiness is not a crime. The FBI can't destroy your life just because you talk like a character from The Sopranos or because you work for Donald Trump. Those are not felonies. Basic norms were violated here. Attorney-client privilege is an ancient and a vital concept. And by the way, so is privacy. The FBI bulldozed all of that. Let's hope they had a very good reason for doing it. The government better have evidence that Michael Cohen was doing something awful, putting lives at stake or betraying his country or something really beyond the pale in order to justify this. If it turns out that all of this was just about a financial settlement with some porn star, which, by the way, is a story that not a single American is honestly shocked by or threatened by, no matter what Anderson Cooper tells you. If that's all it's about, then what we're watching is a grotesque violation of civil liberties. And that would be a real crime, one with actual victims. Every American who believed in representative democracy, for example. James Kallstrom is a former assistant director of the FBI. He joins us tonight. Mr. Kallstrom, you spent your life at the FBI. You're a very, obviously, famous leader at the FBI. When you watch the last years, you've watched it unfold, how do you think the Bureau's doing?
Well, the leadership of the Bureau and the leadership of the department are doing well at all, Tucker. I mean, it's just outrageous. You know, I look back at some records, and during the SNLs in the 80s and 90s, you remember that. You know,
yes.
Literally thousands of SNLs that went belly up, and a lot of corruption, a lot of criminality. Not one law firm in the United States, not one law firm was ever served with a search warrant for that whole period of time. And yet this little 4-person or 5-person law firm that just happens to be the law firm of the President of the United States is attacked by pen registers, by surveillance, by search warrants. And, you know, to get a search warrant from a federal judge, in the criminal side, you have to talk about a criminal act that's taking place, a criminal predicate. And on the national security side, for the FISA judge, you have to talk about the threat to national security, and talk about
yes.
You know, why it's going to be affected negatively in both cases without these extraordinary measures. I think it's far-fetched. I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but to see what kind of a predicate they could have possibly had in this case.
Well, so if it turns out that this really is all about a payment to a porn star, and I hate to say it, but let's be honest, it's just not a surprising story. Nobody voting in 2016 is going to be surprised by this. If it turns out that's really the predicate for this, what do you think of that?
And nor is it surprising that Bob Mueller would do something like this. It's Bob Mueller's people.
Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, look at the history. Look at how he went into Paul Manafort's house and had 4 o'clock in the morning. Here's a potential, if by worst cases, a white-collar crime stuff. And you go into a house at 4 or 5 in the morning with weapons shown. You drag a woman out of bed in her nightgown, and the children I assume screaming, yelling around the house. I mean, that's just an outrage. We don't operate like that in the United States. If I was the head of the FBI, I would have not let the agents participate. Now, this is something that came from Mueller up to the U.S. Attorney in New York. And they apparently put together an affidavit, and I guess the FBI was involved with that, and that was presented to a federal judge. And when you go into a lawyer's office, you've got to be really careful. And the way it works today, you have really two teams of people. One team goes in and does the search. Another team kind of looks through the material to try to segment out anything that would be privilege. And in this case, the federal judge, who now has control over this case, has gone a step further and is turning all that material over to a senior federal judge, Barbara Jones, who's a fantastic judge, a good friend of mine over the years. And she'll decide, you know, what the U.S. government gets to see and what the U.S. government doesn't get to see.
Right. But you think, and I should just clear it up for audience who aren't familiar with your career, I wouldn't describe you as a soft-on-crime liberal at all. But you think, based on decades at the FBI, that what you're watching now is out of line. There's no precedent for it.
Tucker, I don't believe in kicking in doors unless there's a reason for it. And I don't believe for having outrageous search warrants, you know, unless there's a real bona fide reason. Is there a criminal predicate for this? I'd be surprised if there was. If it is, it's probably some concoction from some, you know, stupid intelligence contact. Or is it a national security predicate? I find that would be preposterous. You know, I just think these people are out of control. From the very time that Donald Trump was the nominee of the Republican Party, there has been a conspiracy, a fifth column, call it what you want, that has tried to stop him from getting elected, and number two, stop his effective work for the people of this country. And look at the magnificent job he's done in the economic front, in the foreign relations front, in a year and a half. In my view, more than the last three presidents combined.
I'm awestruck that you're saying this, because you're not a cable news talking head, and any of our viewers who are not familiar with your career ought to go to Google and look it up. You speak with authority on this subject, and so I'm shocked by what you said and saddened, but I believe you because you are believable on this subject. Mr. Kallstrom, thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. No, I don't have the facts, but that's my record. That's what I think is the situation, Tucker.
Well, you have perspective, that's for sure. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
Danny Coulson is a former Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Coulson, thank you for coming on. I want to ask you about Daniel Richman. And we're learning that James Comey, when he ran the FBI, hired a friend of his called Daniel Richman, who's a professor at Columbia, a lawyer, in a kind of gray area job as a crypto government employee, basically to do PR for him and to leak information he thought would be helpful to his reputation. You spent a long time at the FBI. Have you ever seen anything like that before?
I've never seen anything like that, Tucker, and I've talked to a number of former executives in the FBI, and neither have they. You know, this is not like a junior membership in the Garden Club. This is given a man who really has no job except to give some advice and do publicity for the director, getting a security clearance and access to the FBI building. That's really significant to me, and I think there's another issue here in the fact that this individual was the one that Comey leaked to and gave the memos to, and that didn't come up in Comey's hearings. That's troubling to me, and the fact that they did that. I would want an inquiry done. If I were back there, I'd be looking at that. How did this happen? Who generated it, and did the guy get a real background? Was it a FBI background or a name check or database check, or did they go out and really clear this guy? There's a lot of unanswered questions here, and it kind of reflects the way the director of the FBI then, James Comey, ran it.
Well, so since you served in the FBI under other directors, things were not done this way before?
No, I've never seen this. We hire contractors, and they're essential, and they're needed, and they get paid, and they're vetted, and they participate in a lot of really important things. But I've never seen anything like this where it's an unpaid crony of the director of the FBI. That doesn't make any sense to me, and I just wish there was somebody back there that during that regime that would say, Director, this is not the way to go. Somebody that's not owing to him for a promotion or a transfer says, wait, don't do this. This this violates
Right.
at least the look bad rule, and the FBI has an image, and I don't think that he promoted that. And bringing this man on board, I think that was foolhardy.
So, speaking of the way the public perceives the FBI, what do you make of Comey's book tour, where he's taken a series of very political positions? How does that affect the way citizens feel about your agency?
Well, it's troubling, and I think that his book tour and his comments, his book itself, reflects why he was not a successful director of the FBI. The book is entitled in part Higher Authority, and I think that he didn't respect the authority of our Constitution. And I think that it comes out loud and clear when he goes out and makes these outrageous statements. That wasn't a leak. He talks, they justified what he did. He ran the most weak,
Right.
feckless investigation ever in the history of the FBI, and I think that reflects not on the FBI, reflects on him, not us.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate your perspective on that, since again...
Thank you. I enjoyed it. It's always fun.
Mark Penn was, for many years, one of the highest levels advisors to Hillary Clinton. He's the author of the new book, Microtrends Squared, and he joins us tonight. Mark, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.
So you wrote kind of an amazing piece the other day in The Hill, titled something like, Questions I Have for Robert Mueller. Tell us some of the questions that, if you could ask, you would.
Well, remember, Tucker, I spent a year working with President Clinton against Ken Starr and that effort. And I just
Well, I
find
remember
that,
very well.
I just find that was child's play to what's going on here. And I think that, well, Mueller has some questions about what the president was thinking when he fired Comey. Well, I certainly have some questions about what he was thinking when first he went to apply for the FBI job in the first place with Rosenstein, and then turns around the next day. Didn't he already have a plan when he turned around? Boy, when he put that team together and there wasn't a single Trump donor, what was he thinking then? And when he looked at these dossiers and discovered that there was no foundation here, how did he deal with that? And how does he justify, these kinds of really stormtrooper tactics? I think is perhaps not an exaggeration when you go guns drawn to political consultants, wiretaps all over the place over payments to porn stars. This thing has gotten out of control, and while he wants to question the president, it seems that no one can really question either Mueller or Comey or Rosenstein, and that is precisely the problem.
Yeah, it is the problem. And I hate to admit it, since I supported the Ken Starr independent counsel investigation, and I look back in shame because of that. But that was the case that the Clinton people made at the time. There's no oversight here, and that's a huge problem, and it turns out you were right about that. In your piece, you made reference to his behavior in Boston when he worked there in the Whitey Bulger case. Briefly summarize that, if you would, because I thought it was really interesting.
Well, really, the question, and I think Professor Dershowitz has really been out on this thing, that in the Bulger case, there were 4 innocent people in jail due to prosecutorial misconduct, and he was head of the office. And so you do not really find him in the legal cases, but that means he waited until the courts overturned things to release the people. And so what was he thinking when that was happening? How did he permit that? How did he permit these kinds of gross abuses? And how does he then supervise an investigation now that seems to be filled with them?
Mark Penn, again, you have authority on this subject, and so it's nice to hear from you. Thanks a lot.
I went through it once, and I hope America doesn't go through it again.
Yeah. Hillary never would have allowed this. She was too smart for this, there's no doubt. Thank you.
Thank you.
China has a plan in place.